About 70% or so of your immune tissue itself lives in the gut in what's called the gut-associated lymphoid tissue. So when the barrier is compromised and inflammatory compounds are continuously crossing into circulation, your immune system is working overtime every single day without a break. That persistent activation is the thread that connects leaky gut to the skin issues, to the joint aches, the mood instability, the fatigue, and the brain fog. It is a mechanism, not a coincidence. And we'll come back to just how far that thread extends when we talk about mental health later in the show. Welcome to Vitality Radio, the podcast that helps you make sense of natural supplements and thrive without pharma drugs. I'm Jared St. Clair. I grew up in a health food store and spent over 40 years now figuring out what works and what doesn't, so that you can make confident, informed decisions about nutrition, supplements, and your health. Welcome back to Vitality Radio. I'm Jared St. Clair, and today we are going to go deep on something that I believe sits underneath more chronic health problems than almost any other single issue that we talk about on this show: leaky gut. And not just what it is, but a real research-informed protocol, product by product, dose by dose, with the science behind why this particular combination makes total sense as a whole system to help your body recover from this significant issue. So before I get into the protocol, I want to talk about the symptoms, because you need to understand if you're dealing with leaky gut, and you can really figure it out just by symptomology to a very large degree. And then I want to talk about what the leaky gut actually is, how it, not just how it presents, but what's actually happening in the system. And then we'll get into the protocol. So first, let's talk about how to know if maybe you are dealing with leaky gut. And of course, this isn't a diagnostic tool like you'd get from a doctor, but it's a pretty good list of symptoms that give you a pretty good indication that this may be going on. So most people, when they think of leaky gut, are thinking, or when they think of digestion, I guess, and gut health, are thinking of bloating, gas, diarrhea, constipation, those types of things. And yes, those are absolutely on the list of the symptom picture of leaky gut, but it's much broader than that. If you've been living with unexplained fatigue that sleep doesn't fix, brain fog that comes and goes without a clear reason, mood instability or anxiety that doesn't match your life circumstances necessarily, food sensitivities that keep multiplying. You can't eat that thing anymore because you hurt when you do. Joint aches that seem to move around your body, skin issues, rashes, hives, eczema flares, and even acne that nobody can really explain. Leaky gut is a serious and underexplored piece of that picture. Any autoimmune disease, also, from Hashimoto's to Crohn's to lupus to RA, in my view, all have at least part of their origin story residing in a leaky gut. And the mental health connection in particular is something I want to spend real time on today, because I think it's the most underappreciated and one of the most pervasive downstream effects of a compromised gut lining. But we'll get into that in a minute. By the end of this episode, I want you to understand the mechanism, what's driving it in your life, and exactly what to do about it in a fully informed protocol, including a step-by-step guide on how to use it. We'll be introducing more of these comprehensive protocols as we go at Vitality Nutrition. I want to give you a little backstory on that, and then we're going to jump into what leaky gut actually is. Jen and I were at the Cellcore Practitioners Conference in March. That's every year in Boise. It's an amazing conference. I've talked about it on here before. Wonderful practitioners from across the country teaching us some really valuable things. And a lot of what they talk about are protocols that they've proven work inside their clinics for a variety of different issues. And we've had some success with these things too. We've developed some pretty simple protocols here at Vitality, but the one that probably is the most well-known is our protocol that we did in conjunction and cooperation with Cellcore, our 90-day parasite cleanse. And actually, very soon, you're going to hear about our next kind of update to what we're doing with the parasite cleanse on Vitality Radio as well. After the conference, Jen and I had this kind of heart-to-heart talk about how can we provide more for the people who listen to this show, the people that spend time and money at Vitality Nutrition and on vitalitynutrition.com, and be more of a full service type of a company for you. There seemed to be a real demand and a real need for more comprehensive protocols that are simple to follow, not crazy expensive, that don't necessarily require a doctor, a myriad of tests, but that you can just kind of piece together yourselves with some assistance from us. And so we decided, we spent a couple days at this beautiful little Airbnb on the Snake River in nature, walking down to the river each morning and looking at the sunset, all that kind of stuff. It was just absolutely beautiful. And all we did was talk about protocols. We talked about what we can do, and we actually came up with several protocols that we want to develop. And we've been since then developing these protocols. And this is the first one that we're going to share with you, the Leaky Gut Protocol. And it's going to be really simple, but it's going to be comprehensive. And that's really what the goal was. And it's also going to be significantly less expensive than you probably might think that it could be, especially when you factor in that it doesn't require blood tests. It doesn't require stool tests. It doesn't require saliva tests. It doesn't require any of those types of things that are so typical in the functional health world. Nothing wrong with those things, but they're just not always needed. So Jen was going to be here to present this one with me, but she got cold feet. She often gets cold feet just because she gets cold feet. But, we're on YouTube now with the podcast, and she doesn't love the idea of doing this on video, but I'm talking her into it. She'll be here for the next one. But I'm doing this solo today, and I can't wait to get into it. So let's talk about what leaky gut actually is. First, the mechanism, because the term gets thrown around a lot. I think you probably have a basic understanding of it, but let's talk a little bit more clinically. Still going to keep it fairly high level, but I think this will help you understand maybe a little bit more fully what it is, especially if you're one who hasn't looked into it much already. Your intestinal lining is a single layer of cells, which is crazy in and of itself. There's not a lot there as a barrier. That lining is your gatekeeper. Nutrients cross through it into your bloodstream. Everything else is supposed to stay inside the gut and move out through elimination. The cells are held together by structures called tight junctions. These are protein complexes that act kind of like zippers between adjacent cells. When these are working properly, the barrier is very selective. What's supposed to get in, gets in. What doesn't belong in circulation stays out. When these tight junctions break down, when those zippers loosen due to inflammation and stress and wear and tear from a variety of different things that we'll talk about in just a minute, the barrier becomes permeable in ways that it shouldn't be. Partially digested food, particles, bacterial fragments, lipopolysaccharides from bacteria, and inflammatory compounds cross into the bloodstream where they are not supposed to be. Your immune system encounters things it was never designed to deal with on a continuous basis, and it responds. The result is a low-grade systemic inflammatory state that can express itself just about anywhere in the body. And if that keeps going, that can end up in things like autoimmune disease. The clinical term for this is intestinal hyperpermeability. This is not a fringe concept. There are decades of published research on intestinal barrier function and its connection to inflammatory conditions, autoimmune disease, metabolic dysfunction, skin disorders, and mood disorders. It is very well established in the literature. About 70% or so of your immune tissue itself lives in the gut in what's called the gut-associated lymphoid tissue. So when the barrier is compromised and inflammatory compounds are continuously crossing into circulation, your immune system is working overtime every single day without a break. That persistent activation is the thread that connects leaky gut to the skin issues, to the joint aches, the mood instability, to the fatigue, and the brain fog. It is a mechanism, not a coincidence. And we'll come back to just how far that thread extends when we talk about mental health later in the show. All right, so let's talk about the root causes and removing the assault that creates this in the first place, because that's really the most important aspect of this. This isn't optional information. This is really critical and important to the conversation. You can do the best gut healing protocol in the world and get limited results if you are continuously reassaulting the terrain that you're actually trying to repair. It makes sense, right? It's like having a torn bicep and still lifting weights. Removing the causes is not step 2, it's step 1, running simultaneously with everything else. But I believe that if you're in this audience, you probably are already doing many of the things that are removing those root causes, but there are some that you may not be thinking of, or maybe you haven't gotten to yet. Let's talk about number 1, public enemy number 1 to some degree, and that's glyphosate and pesticides. This is where I want to start because this is probably the single most pervasive and under-recognized assault on the gut lining in modern life. Glyphosate, which is the active ingredient in Roundup, the most widely used herbicide in the world, has been shown in research to disrupt the gut microbiome by specifically targeting the beneficial bacteria while leaving more pathogenic organisms intact. What's crazy is it's probably worse than an antibiotic in that way because antibiotics go after pathogens. Unfortunately, glyphosate tends to be more selective in going after just the good guys. Have you ever thought of it that way? It also directly disrupts the tight junction integrity, the very structures that define whether your gut is leaky or not. And it's not just glyphosate. A broad range of pesticide residues in the conventional food supply have documented microbiome disrupting effects. This is the most compelling argument I can make for eating organic as much as possible, or at least choosing the clean 15 and avoiding the dirty dozen in your food supply. These are not small exposures. They are daily, they are cumulative, and directly relevant to gut barrier function. And now, in this wonderful country of ours, as we're just past our 250th anniversary, at least if you're listening here in these United States, where I am, we have a Supreme Court that ruled 7-2 in favor of Monsanto to say they don't even have to put a warning on glyphosate. They were asking for a cancer warning. But how about a warning of, hey, when you're feeding this to yourself or to your kids, you're killing your microbiome and potentially long-term creating leaky gut, which then can turn into autoimmune disease. Nothing like that. They protected Monsanto completely. 7 out of 9 judges. It's pathetic. It's disgusting. It's just more evidence that our country does not care about our health. They only care about corporate greed and dollars, and of course, whatever gets people elected and gets people put in as judges. I'll stop ranting for now. Antibiotics. These can be miraculous drugs. We all know this. They can save lives, but they also wipe out the microbial ecosystem that plays a direct role in maintaining the mucosal barrier. A single course can shift gut ecology for months or years or permanently. Multiple courses over the years, which describes most adults in this country, represents a substantial cumulative disruption of the terrain. If you've had significant antibiotic exposure in your life, your gut microbiome has paid a price that may still be affecting you and likely is, especially if any of that exposure was as a child in the first 4 years of life when your microbiome was being formed in the first place. So, how do we avoid antibiotics? We educate ourselves. We listen to shows like Vitality Radio, where I've done specific shows about that. And we learn how to do things naturally. Because in my view, and I'm very, very solid in this belief, and I'm living proof, as are my children, we don't need antibiotics the vast majority of the time they're prescribed. Because I've been on 2 in my entire life, and I'm 53 years old, 54 maybe by the time this airs. None of my kids have had an antibiotic. You don't have to do it most of the time. You just have to be educated enough to figure out how not to. So if you're still relying on antibiotics, please spend the time to figure out how to avoid them. What about NSAIDs? Do we think about that? That's NSAIDs, ibuprofen, naproxen sodium, aspirin, clinically documented to increase intestinal permeability. Immediately, by the way, not over time, but immediately, when you take them, they open things up. And when you take them chronically, things tend to stay open. That evidence goes back decades. People take these casually and constantly, and the cumulative effect on the gut lining is real and significant. This is one most people don't think about, but hormonal birth control. And it's a real issue. Oral contraceptives disrupt the gut microbiome. They deplete key nutrients, including zinc and B vitamins that are critical for mucosal integrity and contribute to the kind of dysbiosis that both drives and perpetuates leaky gut. If you are on a hormonal birth control or have been for a significant period of time, this belongs in your root cause picture. Chronic stress. Cortisol directly increases intestinal permeability. That is a physiological mechanism, not a metaphor. The gut-brain axis runs in both directions, and what's happening in your nervous system is actively affecting your gut lining at all times. Chronic stress is not a soft cause. It is a direct and measurable one. And I actually talked about that on Carl and Carl's show, the Just Ingredients podcast, just a few weeks ago. If you didn't catch that episode, we talk a lot about cortisol and how impactful cortisol is in your health across the board, but gut health in particular. And then, of course, your diet, ultra processed foods, refined sugar, and alcohol all have documented connections to increase gut permeability. Gluten triggers the release of zonulin, a protein that directly modulates tight junction opening. Research out of the University of Maryland in the early 2000s reframed the entire conversation around gluten sensitivity when it was published. And dysbiosis, the wrong balance of organisms in the gut, both causes and perpetuates leaky gut in a self-reinforcing cycle. The reason I'm being thorough here is that the protocol I'm about to walk you through is powerful. It is effective, and it works significantly better when you're not continuing to pour fuel on the fire while you're trying to put it out. Clean up what you can, eat organic where possible, filter your water, reduce unnecessary NSAID use, antibiotic use, figure out options when it comes to medications that might mess with your gut, and of course, address the stress. These are not optional lifestyle suggestions. They're actually part of the protocol. And in the protocol information that we will send you if you decide to try this, we go through that as well and give you more tips and tricks and things that can help. Now, how was this protocol designed? Well, the how is me and Jen sitting there talking about it for a couple of days. But then we looked at just this history that we have, especially that I have over all the years that I've owned Vitality Nutrition, now almost 33 years of owning this place and talking to people with these types of issues, and recognizing that in almost every case, there isn't a single ingredient that fixes a thing. It is usually some sort of team effort, and therefore a supplement protocol would be needed for something like leaky gut. We often have people come in looking for collagen for leaky gut, or bone broth for leaky gut, or colostrum, or probiotics, or glutamine, or zinc L-carnosine. And all of these things are potentially very helpful. But my experience has shown me that over the years, this is a problem that is not a one solution fix. It's a combination of things that really make this work. So, and the reason for that is simple. What's required is direct fuel for the cells that line the intestinal wall, but also structural support for the tight junctions themselves, mucosal protection while repair is underway, a healthy microbial environment that supports rather than undermines the process, and anti-inflammatory support throughout to help keep things tight as the body is repairing. Those are distinct mechanisms, and different ingredients address those distinct issues. Every product in this protocol has a defined role. Some roles overlap, and that's intentional. More than one ingredient here supports tight junction integrity, for example. That overlap is not redundancy, though. When you're addressing something as structurally fundamental as gut barrier function, multiple mechanisms working on the same target from different angles is exactly the right approach. Research on multi-nutrient gut support consistently shows that combinations outperform any single ingredient in isolation. The core protocol, though, is still pretty simple. It's 4 products: CoreMend GI from our friends at CellCore, NutraBio L-glutamine powder, Vital Spores from Vitality Nutrition, and Source Naturals Zinc L-carnosine. It's pretty straightforward, and it's actually quite affordable for most people. Let's talk about the products and why they make sense. The first one, and the biggest one, is CoreMend GI. And we did learn about CoreMend GI at the CellCore conference, which is what spurred this whole thing in the first place, that we should be looking at a true leaky gut protocol. And frankly, this is how it went. We looked at the CoreMend GI. We liked the CoreMend GI. We tasted the CoreMend GI. It's a powder that you mix in water, and it was very pleasant to drink. So we weren't worried about that. But as I was looking through the formula, what I recognized was a good, solid gut support product that would probably over time help to heal and strengthen leaky gut. But I simply didn't think on its own, for quick, significant benefit, it is enough. I felt like it needed more support, and that's why we decided to add to it. But it is the core of this program. It is called CoreMend, and I do really like what they've done with this product. It's just, you can't throw everything into one product, right? So the ingredients list really kind of anchors everything else that we're talking about in this protocol. L-glutamine at 2,000 milligrams. Glutamine is a primary fuel source for the enterocytes, the cells that actually line your intestinal wall. These cells turn over rapidly and have high energy demands. When glutamine is depleted, the lining breaks down. Research published in the International Journal of Molecular Sciences confirms that glutamine promotes enterocyte proliferation, regulates tight junction proteins directly, and suppresses pro-inflammatory signaling in the gut. We're adding more glutamine on top of this, though, because the dosing is, I still think, a little low in the Cormint formula. The next ingredient, and I love this one and I love the dose of it, is N-acetyl D-glucosamine. Most people think it's glucosamine for joint health, and it's great for joint health, but this specific form is a structural building block for the mucosal layer itself, the protective gel coating that sits between the gut contents and the epithelial cells. Most gut protocols ignore this mucus layer entirely, but this formula doesn't, and I love that they added it to the ingredients list. Licorice root extract at 400 milligrams is a very gut supportive herb. It has a long track record in botanical medicine for maintaining the protective mucus layer and supporting mucosal integrity. So you've got two excellent things for the mucus layer there. Aloe vera leaf extract at 300 milligrams, direct anti-inflammatory activity in gut tissue, supporting the soothing environment the lining needs while cellular repair happens underneath. Quercetin at 200 milligrams. Research published in 2019 found that quercetin directly supports the expression of the tight junction proteins, occludin and claudin, the actual structural proteins that hold those cellular zippers closed. It's working at the molecular level on the precise structures that define gut barrier integrity. Also, slippery elm and marshmallow root, two of the most well-regarded mucosal demulcents in herbal medicine. They coat the lining and create the soothing environment that the gut needs while repair happens at the cellular level. It also has a few other supportive ingredients, MSM, cat's claw, chamomile. All of these are valuable as well, but I want to focus on a couple others that I think are really, really critical here. L-theanine at 100 milligrams, which is kind of weird, honestly. I looked at that and I was like, wait a minute, L-theanine, but it makes perfect sense. And it fits brilliantly. And this is one of the things that I love about Cellcore. They do tend to think outside the box. At 100 milligrams, it's a smart formula addition because it helps with modulating cortisol. And I already talked about how big of an impact cortisol can have on the gut. So it's a really nice addition there. Zinc as a very specific form, zinc L-carnosine, which I'll talk about in more detail a little bit later in the show. It's a meaningful addition, but this is another one where I thought we really need more than what's in this formula. And then this one is big, 4 grams of something called Solnol, resistant potato starch mixed with partially hydrolyzed guar gum. These are prebiotic fibers, and these fibers are really, really cool. And I've known about this one for a while, but I wasn't familiar with this Solnol resistant potato starch. And I'm going to get into those in a second. But then the other thing that was kind of iffy for me was when I first started looking at the Cormint, trying to figure out why did they choose the GI probiotics that they did. 3 billion units of Lactobacillus plantarum, also Lactobacillus rhamnosus, and Bifidobacterium longum. These 3 strains, though, are selected for a very wise reason. They specifically work at the mucosal adhesion level and immune modulation in the gut associated with the lymphoid tissue itself. Targeted strains with documented relevance to gut lining support, not general purpose probiotics here. So as I was looking at this, my first thought was, you got to have spores in here, some very specific spores, and I'll explain why in a little bit. But as I researched these 3 individual ingredients, these 3 probiotics, I realized exactly what they're going for, and it makes perfect sense. But now I want to get back to that fiber blend because there's a story here that goes really deep, and I'm pretty excited about it. Solnol is a clinically studied resistant potato starch, what they call RS2 type, which means it resists digestion in the small intestine and arrives in the large intestine intact, where it ferments slowly and selectively. A 2023 randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trial found that just 3.5 grams of this specific fiber produced significantly larger amounts of Bifidobacterium and Akkermansia after 4 weeks compared to the placebo. Now, Bifidobacterium, most people have heard of. It's human strain probiotics. They're largely found in the colon. These are really important, all good. But Akkermansia, if you've heard me talk about my GLP-1 metabolic optimizer formula, if you heard me talking on Carlin's podcast. You know, I'm a huge believer in Akkermansia. I absolutely love this probiotic. It is a keystone organism specifically associated with the health of the mucus layer, that exact protective gel coating that we've been talking about through this entire segment. It feeds on and helps maintain mucin, the structural protein the gut uses to build that mucosal barrier. The fact that a prebiotic fiber in this formula is selectively feeding the organism most responsible for mucus layer integrity is awesome. It's precisely the right target in a leaky gut context. And I love that Cellcore did this. In fact, one of the things I was looking for in the formula was Akkermansia. It's not there, but something that feeds Akkermansia is. And so they just did it in a different way. The other fiber, partially hydrolyzed guar gum, adds another dimension. It is a soluble fiber that ferments in the colon to produce short-chain fatty acids, primarily butyrate, acetate, and propionate. And butyrate is the primary fuel source for colonocytes, the cells lining your large intestine, and it directly supports barrier function from the lower GI end. A 2019 randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trial found that 3 months of this specific type of fiber significantly improved stool form in people with IBS-like symptoms. A separate crossover trial found it modulated gut microbiome composition and increased bifidobacterium populations. Together, these two fibers are selectively feeding the organisms most relevant to gut barrier integrity while simultaneously producing the metabolites those cells need to function. That is a fiber blend that makes a ton of sense. And it's the reason why Cormend is at the base of this combination, this protocol that we put together, is because it's so well thought out. As again, I said at the beginning, and I'll always call it out, even with companies that I love, like Cellcore, I think the formula could be more complete, could be a little more potent in a couple of areas, a little more comprehensive. But I understand why they didn't do it quite like what I'm recommending. And I think the single biggest thing might just simply be price. But what's interesting is we've figured out a way through the combination that we're developing for this protocol, or that we've developed for this protocol, to still keep the price at a very reasonable level and give you all of the support that I believe that you need. L-glutamine, 10 grams per day, is the next ingredient. Cormend already has 2 grams of glutamine per serving. And that's a real evidence-supported contribution, but it's just not enough based on the research that's out there. Most of the research out there is somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 to 15 grams per day. In fact, there's a 2019 study of 115 adults with post-infectious IBS who had confirmed elevated intestinal permeability at baseline. So we knew they had IBS, and they definitely had intestinal permeability, aka leaky gut. The dose was 5 grams 3 times per day of L-glutamine for 8 weeks. Nearly 80% of participants in the glutamine group hit the primary endpoint of the study versus just about 6% in the placebo group. Intestinal permeability markers normalized significantly. And in a 2024 systematic review of meta-analysis of 12 different randomized controlled trials, they found that glutamine on its own was one of the strongest things that has ever been studied for permeability effects at higher doses. So between the Cormend GI formula from Cellcore and the 2 scoops of L-glutamine from NutriBio, you're getting 12 grams, which puts you in the sweet spot in my book, between 10 and 15 grams a day. And we already know that there's a ton of benefit to just L-glutamine, but then you get all of those additional benefits with the Cellcore product as well. NutriBio is the brand that I'm recommending here because they are among the most transparent companies in the industry, fully disclosed labels, no fillers, third-party tested. 2 scoops equals 10 grams, and they're also one of the more economical products for this purpose. So absolutely love that as the second leg of this 4-leg stool that we're recommending here for the protocol. The third thing you've already heard about, but you may not know much about it, and that's zinc L-carnosine. Zinc L-carnosine, known in Japan as zinc, has a clinical history that separates it from most supplement ingredients on the market. It went through a full pharmaceutical approval process in Japan and has been prescribed there as a drug for gastric mucosal support since 1994. A phase 3 trial comparing it to an established gastric drug found a 51% clinical outcome rate at 8 weeks, confirmed by endoscopy. A multi-center randomized controlled trial in 224 patients confirmed comparable effectiveness to another established mucosal drug, also at 8 weeks. But what's cool about it is that it is a prescription drug in Japan, but is a natural supplement. It is zinc bonded to L-carnosine, an amino acid. So a mineral and amino acid, basically a chelate. And yet this stuff is awesome. And it's awesome at very low doses. What makes it unique is that it physically adheres to the mucosal lining in the gut. It binds at sites of damage and releases zinc locally, like goes in there and actually sits where the repair is needed, supports cellular repair, acting as a direct antioxidant, stabilizing tight junction proteins, and suppressing pro-inflammatory cytokines right where they're needed. A 2007 randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trial in healthy volunteers showed that in just 7 days of supplementation, it completely prevented the threefold increase in intestinal permeability that the placebo group experienced from NSAID use. Now, I want to get into that a little bit. I told you that NSAIDs, aspirin, ibuprofen, naproxen sodium, Aleve, all that stuff, that those drugs have an immediate effect. It's about 3x, in fact, in a week's time, 3 times as much intestinal permeability or leaky gut showing up in 7 days on these drugs. And when taking zinc L-carnosine, that disappeared. That is targeted and direct results very, very quickly. Now, Cormand already contributes zinc L-carnosine, but it contributes not the full clinical dose. I want you to have the full clinical dose because we know that it works. And zinc L-carnosine is really pretty inexpensive. It's like $13 for a month's supply. So why not? So now we have a true comprehensive 3-legged stool, but it's not quite done yet, this protocol. There's one more ingredient. I already told you what it was at the beginning, and it's the one that I, of course, am probably the most fond of because it's mine. But regardless, I've had such good success with Vital Spores, the Vital 5 probiotic with leaky gut and people with these types of symptoms all by itself now for over 5 years since we introduced it. You cannot, in my view, create a leaky gut protocol that doesn't include these specific spore probiotics and Saccharomyces boulardii. So let's talk about it. Vital Spores is this comprehensive 4-ingredient formula that covers a ton of bases with 3 spores: Bacillus coagulans, Bacillus subtilis, Bacillus clausii, and a yeast that I absolutely love called Saccharomyces boulardii. Between those ingredients, there are a total of 8 billion units of activity in this formula, but 5 billion of that is in the Bacillus spore strains. And Bacillus coagulans is among the most researched probiotic strains available. In 2019, double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled trial. You'll notice that I keep saying double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled. These are legitimate gold standard studies proving this in real humans, not animals, showing that this stuff works. This specific trial was done, and what they showed that there was a significant reduction in bloating, abdominal pain, and stool frequency over 90 days in IBS patients. A 2018 trial found significant improvement in both GI symptoms and food markers at 90 days, a direct signal through the gut-brain axis that we'll come back to in just a minute. And then Bacillus subtilis has been extensively studied at the Royal Holloway University in London, and a human trial using a spore blend, including that spore, for 30 days showed significant reduction in intestinal permeability markers, including circulating endotoxins, which is a massive sign that you've got leaky gut. When you see all that stuff in the blood, leaky gut is there. And the 3 probiotics that are found in Vital Spores were all present in the probiotic that was studied at the Royal Holloway University of London. But Vital Spores also has a secret weapon that was not found in that probiotic, and that is called Saccharomyces boulardii. 3 billion units, one of the most well-studied probiotic organisms in the world. It inhibits myosin light chain phosphorylation, a specific molecular mechanism that directly preserves tight junction integrity. A 2019 review confirmed its role in restoring intestinal barrier function across multiple clinical conditions. A human study in Crohn's disease patients found it reduced intestinal permeability by 33% in 3 months. Now, think about this. That's the end of the main protocol, 4 products. And throughout, I talked about 4 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks of these things showing significant reductions in leaky gut all by themselves. As you know by now, if you're a regular listener to the show, and especially if you heard me talk about the GLP-1 metabolic optimizer, my approach is simple. I want to find ingredients that work all by themselves. And then I want to find other ingredients that are synergistic, or that we at least hope will be synergistic when combined, that also work all by themselves. What we've done here with this protocol, and I'm extremely excited about it, as you could probably tell, I'm kind of oozing with this excitement here with this product combination, is we've really done what Cellcore did by putting a bunch of the right ingredients in there and adding just a few more of our own that we felt were either missing at high enough doses in the Cellcore product or were missing entirely. But all of what's in this protocol works all by itself. And when combined, we believe it will get better results more quickly and more permanently, particularly if we do what I talked about at the very beginning of the show, and that is remove as many of the assaults as we possibly can. So each of these 4 products means something on their own, and each individual ingredient in these products makes a lot of impact on its own. But when we put these things together and we look at the 7 days and the 4 weeks and the 8 weeks and the 12 weeks and all of the different trials, we believe that within 30 days, there will be a significant improvement in many cases, a noticeable improvement. And within 60 days, even more, and within 90 days, more than that. And then at that point, it's a matter of trying to figure out, do I need to go beyond what I've already done, or am I already getting the results that I hope that I would get? Now, I'm going to recommend 3 months based on that. But the short-term human data across these ingredients, combined with a clear understanding of their mechanisms and decades of functional medicine clinical observation, all point in the same direction, that 1 month is probably enough to know it's working for you or it's not. I don't know that in many cases 1 month will be enough to do the job, but I do believe that 1 month will be enough to know that the job is being done. So let's talk about the protocol when it comes to mental health. I want to give this a very specific section, and there's a reason for that. I was just on the phone just yesterday, actually, when, as I'm recording this anyway, with a client who is a wonderful young woman who I've been working with now for about 3 months. And prior to me working with her as a client over the phone, she was a listener to the podcast. And she started doing 2 simple things for her mental health. She did not, as she put it, tell me that she thought they were going to be particularly effective, but she hoped that they would be. She was kind of giving it a 50-50 shot, as she said. She was doing Vital Spores and Vital 5 Magnesium because anxiety was crippling. She was really, really struggling. And she said to me that it kind of gave her life back. Complete game changer, absolutely massive difference. And I believe that that's really, really simple. And she got all this information from previous episodes of the podcast, but everything I just said about those probiotics matters. That Vital Spores formula, those key ingredients, we know what they do as psychobiotics, actually improving mental health by improving gut-brain axis. And we know that magnesium nourishes the central nervous system and that is significantly depleted in people that deal with chronic stress. So 2 things: 4 probiotics in the one formula and the magnesium changed her life. I'm so confident in this protocol because just the probiotics alone work so well for so many people. And just glutamine by itself works so well for so many people. Now, Cormin, frankly, it's brand new. We've hardly sold any of it. I've had no feedback on it. So I don't know how well it's going to work, but I know how well it should work based on what I told you about all those key, incredible ingredients in there. And we know what zinc L-carnosine does. We talked about that. But let's talk about this mental health game, because this particular client, the reason I brought her up is that she wasn't looking for gut health improvement. She was looking for mental health improvement. And that is such a hidden, maybe incredible, beautiful, positive side effect of fixing leaky gut. About 90% of your body's serotonin is produced in the gut. You probably have heard that. Dopamine precursor synthesis depends heavily on the gut microbiome. GABA signaling has direct connections to the enteric nervous system. The vast neural network embedded in your gut walls that communicates constantly with your brain through the vagus nerve. All of that starts down there. When the gut lining is compromised and the microbial ecosystem is disrupted, the signaling environment for neurotransmitter production and the communication that it provides is fundamentally impaired. These neurotransmitters don't work efficiently when the terrain they're produced in is inflamed and dysbiotic. That's not a metaphor. That's just how the body works. The field of psychobiotics has produced compelling research in the last decade showing that specific probiotic strains directly influence mood, anxiety, and cognitive function through the gut-brain axis. A 2018 randomized trial found that Bacillus coagulans, the same genus found in vital spores, produced significant improvements in mood scores alongside GI symptoms improvement in 90 days. These are not soft findings. This gut-brain connection is mechanistic. It's bidirectional, gut to brain to gut, and well characterized in the research. And then there's the inflammatory piece. When bacterial fragments and lipopolysaccharides continuously cross a compromised gut lining, they trigger systemic immune activation. That systemic inflammatory activation crosses into the brain. Neuroinflammation is now recognized as a significant driver of depression, anxiety, and cognitive dysfunction. Research out of multiple institutes in the last decade has directly linked elevated intestinal permeability to markers of neuroinflammation and mood disorders. Healing the gut lining reduces that inflammatory load. That is the mechanism in which gut repair can produce real and sometimes dramatic improvements in mental health. It's a direct effect. I called it a happy side effect earlier, but it's really a direct effect of reducing systemic inflammatory burden. People who heal their gut often describe feeling more like themselves than they have in years. Clearer thinking, more emotional stability, less anxiety. That seems to come from nowhere. That is not a coincidence. That is the gut brain axis working the way it's supposed to work when the barrier is intact. If you're listening to this and mental health is part of your picture, anxiety, depression, brain fog, mood instability, that doesn't make sense given your circumstances, please take the gut lining conversation seriously. It may be the most important thing that you haven't addressed yet. Now, I'm going to recommend one extra thing that you may want to consider. Actually, I'm going to recommend two extra things you may want to consider, and then I'll talk about how this protocol comes together, what it costs. All that stuff will be on the table at the end of this show, which is almost over, I promise. If you feel like you've got a more severe case, maybe you've got autoimmune disease, maybe you've read about some of these other ingredients that I'm about to talk about and feel like they make sense for you. Maybe you're already using them. If you wanted to add a couple of things onto this, there are a couple of things you could consider. Colostrum is one of the things that I recommend. Ancient Nutrition Colostrum is my top add-on because it works in a completely different way than just about everything else in this bundle, this protocol that we put together. Bovine colostrum, of course, is the first milk produced by cows after birth, and it has extraordinarily a dense amount of immunoglobulins, including IgG and IgA growth factors, including IGF-1 and EGF, and lactoferrin. These growth factors stimulate proliferation and repair of intestinal epithelial cells and support the synthesis of tight junction proteins, the same proteins targeted by quercetin and cormend from an entirely different biological pathway, and possibly in a stronger way than what 200 milligrams of quercetin can do. The immunoglobulin content, particularly secretory IgA, helps neutralize pathogens at the gut surface and supports the mucosal immune environment directly. So the reason it's an add-on rather than the core is that the evidence based for the 4 core products is more directly and specifically targeted to gut lining repair. Colostrum strong research is more in athletes and people under specific pharmacological gut stress. And it's good research, but it's just not as deep and it's not as certain. And frankly, I wanted to keep the price in a reasonable level that most people can handle without much trouble financially. And So I'll say this, if you can handle an extra 40 bucks or so per month, the colostrum makes a lot of sense, especially if you're really struggling, and maybe even just in the first month or two to kind of kick start this thing. But if not, go with the basic protocol. It has all the proof, and I frankly think it's going to be good enough for most people right out of the gate, and that we're going to get you where you want to be, even if it takes a few months to get there. And what I am going to do is I'm going to offer the colostrum, which is normally 55 bucks a month. The Ancient Nutrition Colostrum is the brand that I recommend. I trust their brand. I trust their colostrum. And it's normally about 55 bucks for a 60-day supply, but I don't think the supply is really 60 days. I think you need to take 2 servings per day. And I was able to negotiate a deal in conjunction with what we're doing with this protocol to where I'm going to be able to give you 30% off on it. So it's normally about 55 bucks. That brings it down to the $40 range. And like I say, for a month's supply, if you want to add it on. So you get the 30% off if you get the protocol along with it. Now let's talk a little bit about lifestyle, and then we'll get to the rest of the protocol, the pricing and dosing and all that kind of stuff. The supplements do a lot, but there are things that you can do that you can add or change in your diet that I think can make a huge difference. And I am a massive fan of raw milk. Cow's milk or goat's milk, either one is fine. I use cow's milk myself. In fact, my shaker cup here is got our bone broth protein, rebuild protein, plus half raw milk and half water. It's breakfast almost every day for me. Big believer in raw milk. Obviously, get it from a place that's reputable, that has a history in your area, but don't be scared of raw milk. It's not the big scary thing that the government makes it out to be. Can I just digress for a minute? Do you realize that the government is protecting Monsanto more than it's protecting raw milk farmers? Think about that for a minute. Stuff is pretty backwards in this country, and we need to fight back as a people, and we need to not be scared of the things the government tells us to be scared of. We probably need to be scared of the things the government tells us not to be scared of. That's really the truth here. But back to raw milk. Raw milk contains beneficial bacteria, natural enzymes, immunoglobulins, and growth factors that are largely destroyed by pasteurization. It is a living food that supports the mucosal environment and the microbiome in ways that processed dairy simply cannot. And you may be thinking to yourself, I don't do milk. It hurts me when I drink milk, especially if you have an autoimmune issue, or especially if you have a severe gut issue like IBS, or you have a lot of sensitivity to dairy when you drink it, or you have Crohn's or ulcerative colitis. But you know what I've seen? I've seen this. People with lactose intolerance almost always do great with raw milk. People that don't do well with casein almost always do fine with raw milk. People who have Crohn's disease and it wrecks them when they drink pasteurized milk almost always do good with raw milk. It is 2 different things. Please don't think dairy is dairy. Please don't think milk is milk. Raw milk and pasteurized milk, living, healthy. This is a great health food. Pasteurized milk, not so much. Another thing you can consider, true fermented foods are in the same category for me, a living probiotic food, really, really good for your gut. And then the last thing I'll say as far as foods that you can add to your protocol would be bone broth. You can make your own bone broth. If you're going to be industrious like that, do it. Please just use organic, grass-fed, pasture-raised, all the good stuff if you're going to make your bone broth. You can buy bone broth. You can do it a whole bunch of different ways. You can make soup out of it. You can do a lot of things with it. But what I do, as I said, is I drink it right here with the Rebuild Plus formula from Vitality Nutrition. It's the most delicious chocolate shake ever. I put it with my raw milk, and that is something I do every day as a gut health cocktail, if you want to call it that just happens to also be breakfast. So that's another thing you can consider doing as well. Additional options you may want to consider, and then we'll get into the protocol. Again, I know I keep throwing that at you, but we're almost there, I promise. I just want to make sure you have all the options in front of you. Ion Gut Support from Intelligence of Nature. This is a product that I feel strongly about, so strongly that I've dedicated a couple of entire episodes, including episode 427. It's going to be linked in the show description. Listen to that and see what you think. It's a soil-derived folate. I love it. It's detoxifying. It's healing. There's 2 reasons I left it out of the protocol. One is it's fairly expensive. It's about 70 bucks for a bottle of Ion Gut Support. I don't think it's needed for most people that are listening to this, but for people that are really severely compromised, it's something you may want to consider. I wouldn't necessarily consider it right out of the gate. I'd consider it after a month or 2 on the protocol if you decide to do the protocol, if you feel you need more support. But I love it. Go listen to the show and see what you think. And then the other thing I will mention, just because it's so critical for overall digestion and for the stress response and everything else, is a couple of the vital five things: omega-3 for all the positive anti-inflammatory benefits, and digestive enzymes, of course, for all the reasons: breaking down your food more easily, reducing putrefaction in the gut, and decreasing the need for the gut to work so hard, creating more inflammatory signaling, that kind of thing. These are other things that you may want to consider. Now, let's talk about the dosing of this thing and what it actually costs, because I think you're going to be surprised. It's just not too bad. At least I hope you agree with me, especially whenever you see everything that's included. Every morning on an empty stomach, Cormin GI, 1 stick pack in water. NutriBio L-glutamine, 1 scoop, 5 grams. These have to be on an empty stomach at least 30 to 45 minutes before you eat. If you're taking other empty stomach things, most of those can be done with these. But if you have questions, you can ask us in the chat. And don't worry about these directions too much. I'm going to do this real simply. If you decide to get the protocol, you'll have very targeted directions that come along with it. And then in the evening, you take 1 scoop of glutamine. I'm just giving you this so you know what it entails, so you're not wondering, okay, how hard is this going to be? You're also then, with a meal, going to take Source Naturals Zinc L-carnosine, 1 capsule. And if you decide to add colostrum, you're going to do 2 scoops of that per day. I would do a scoop with each scoop of your glutamine. So the glutamine at night on an empty stomach, at least 2 hours after you eat, and the glutamine in the morning with the Cormend, the zinc L-carnosine, 1 capsule per day, and the vital spores, 1 capsule per day as well, with a meal. That's the entire protocol. Pretty simple. Drink plenty of water and do everything that you can from a lifestyle standpoint to support it. The bundle options that we have for you are a 1-month bundle and a 3-month bundle, depending on how much you think you need, how much you want to kind of dip your toes in versus jumping all in, and also how much you want to save, because I am trying to make it as economical as possible for you. The 30-day bundle, Cormin GI plus NutriBio glutamine plus Vital Spores plus the Source Naturals Zinc L-carnosine, is normally $158, but we're taking it down a little more than 20% to $125.99. So that's your 1-month supply. Now, you're not going to be on this month after month after month after month after month, but you may be on it month after month after month, right? So 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, depending on your situation. It might be longer than that if you've got an autoimmune thing. But what I do believe, as I said earlier in the show, and I really do believe this, you're going to get there to the point of significant benefit way before you get to maximum benefit, if that makes sense. I think you're going to be seeing some real improvement within the first several weeks of doing this, and then it should get better and better and better. And at one point, you'll be able to decide if you want to reduce everything down or completely out, or maybe even get to, one product. Maybe it's just the Vital Spores, part of the Vital 5 on a regular basis. It's kind of a maintenance thing. You can decide at that point. The 90-day bundle is $329. So now we're talking $110 instead of $116 per month. That's over 30% off of full retail. And that is what I recommend. 12 weeks on this protocol. It's really a full 90 days on this protocol. Makes all kinds of sense based on the research, because just like what I talked about in the GLP-1 protocol episode, the same applies here. The research was all done somewhere, well, in this one, as short as 7 days, but as long as 12 weeks. And we want to see optimal benefit. And frankly, leaky gut didn't happen overnight. It's not going to repair itself overnight. But I do believe that if you start with a 1 month, you're going to be absolutely thrilled. Remove the root causes first. Do the things that I recommend in the protocol. Shift around the lifestyle. This is how we heal leaky gut. I'm so excited to share this with you. I've been wanting to share this with you ever since March, when Jen and I first started talking about it, but it took time to develop and get it right. And remember, you'll get the products with this protocol. You'll get the discount with this protocol. There will be links in the show description on exactly how to find it. Also, for at least the first few months after this episode, we'll have a banner up there. It'll be real easy to find. If you type in Vitality Leaky Gut Protocol, you can find it that way as well. At vitalitynutrition.com. Of course, we'll have it in store as well. You'll get that, and you'll get a little booklet that is comprehensive in nature of the lifestyle stuff. So you have that stuff there. It's going to have a little response chart in there where you can actually track your symptomology to see if you're making improvements. Everything that you need will be in this. You're going to have a little booklet that acts as your coach along with this episode of Vitality Radio. We want to support you as much as we possibly can. I'd love feedback on this show, and I can't wait to hear feedback on the protocol. If you like the idea of these protocols that are laid out specifically for specific issues that you may be dealing with, and you like the way that we did it, let us know. If you feel it needs improvement, let us know. You can let us know in the chat, vitalitynutrition.com. You can call us at 801-292-6662. You can come into our South Ogden location or our Bountiful location and talk to us personally. Right now, almost every Tuesday and Wednesday, if you want to see me, I'm at the South Ogden location. I'd love to meet you if I haven't met you already. That's it for this episode of Vitality Radio. That is the Leaky Gut Protocol. I'm so excited to get it out there. Please let me know what you think. And if you have questions, call us 801-292-6662. I'm Jared St. Clair, and this has been Vitality Radio. Thanks for listening to the Vitality Radio podcast. If this episode helped you, follow the show, share it with someone, and explore trusted education and resources at vitalitynutrition.com. See you next time.
Hello, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Vitality Radio. Just a reminder that this podcast is for educational purposes only. This podcast has not been evaluated by the FDA. This podcast is provided with the understanding that the information shared is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. This podcast is not a substitute for professional care by a medical professional. Thank you.